and John Meister asked me to give this talk, and honestly, he considered it more of a Q&A, so I'll keep that format like that a little bit. So I've got a few slides, but really I wanted to keep it fairly open. And it's one of those things where I get questions a lot from students, incoming students. They want to go to college to make games, and which is great. That's it's a good industry. As you can see, right, LexPlay is improving kind of the appearance of the industry in our area, right? It's already been occurring. There's been independent game developers have been kind of popping up all over the place between Lexington, Louisville. We have some in Bowling Green, some in Richmond. It's nice to see this coming to fruition, right? We're seeing more of what's being done around here. But one of those things, as I even talk to these independent developers out here, people still don't know much about games. Games is like kind of this black box. Games get magically produced and developed and sold, and anybody outside of games, any other industry, it's just games. Just they don't know. I don't know if they want to know. They just have no idea how games are made. Even software developers, if they're making if they're making apps for banks, education, other things, games are kind of this mystical black box that people just don't know that much about. So that's kind of one of the things I wanted to address. And if people have questions, I'll leave plenty of time for questions or even discussion. Comments are fine too. So we started, just a really quick overview. EKU, we have it's a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science with a concentration in interactive multimedia. Again, I was talking with folks out there. We call it interactive multimedia because you call it games, and all of a sudden people don't take your degree as seriously. I'm sorry to say that. I don't like that fact. But it's one of those things that's kind of a political thing. We've kept our degree called interactive multimedia, so the degrees around here get taken more seriously. Not to say, and again, I'm a proponent of games in any area, whether it's a serious game or games purely for entertainment or escape, are all great. So our program, we started about 7 years ago, and about 2 years ago, we founded the Gaming Institute. We really started to push games. We had Vector, which is a conference last spring. If you're able to attend next spring, it'd be great. We had speakers from Sony and Google attend or speak there, and Insomniac Games. But we're trying to do more things, right? We don't want people to be that either confused about games or just ignorant about games in our area. LexPlay is helping that too, and that's kind of one of the things. We still get we call it the Gaming Institute, and half of our state representatives think that has to do with horse racing. So at some point that might change, hopefully, but we don't necessarily do anything related to gambling or horse racing of any kind. Even though there are some very interesting cross sections on that as well. Anyway, so I wanted to start off with this question, and this was just off a forum I had found. This question gets asked a lot, and I was thinking about taking this a little bit more toward the discussion of a game pitch, because really, if you can't describe the game you want to make, you probably don't have a game worth making, right? The idea of a pitch is one of those things that's worth discussing and it's worth spending time on. And the nice thing about talking about a pitch is people in business understand a pitch. They know if you can pitch your product, if you can pitch a business idea, they'll take you seriously. So there's a lot of overlap there with games. Again, if you can pitch a game, people will take you seriously as opposed to kind of rambling and describing a game you'd like to make, but not being able to concisely get that idea across. I think in the description of this talk, I talked about, there's the hard skills you need. There's also the soft skills you need. You need these skills to be able to talk with your team to discuss, what you want to put in your game. or how the game should function, the overall design of it, that's just as important as actually having the hard skills to, whether it's art skills to create the art assets or, your programming skills to write code and others. So just to address this comment, I guess it's a question without a question mark. I took the quote exactly. So in general, pitching a game idea to a big game company is probably not your best approach. They have a backlog of thousands of ideas, and they would love to implement all of their ideas, and your idea, even if it's the best game idea ever, is going to be at the end of that log of ideas, let alone any kind of proprietary issues and intellectual property and who owns the game idea. A lot of big studios won't even take outside ideas just because of the ownership issues. So that kind of goes, my answer to that question or even discussion would be, don't pitch your idea to a big game company. It's unless you know someone already there, unless you have a network, which is extremely important. If you're just trying to cold call and say, I've got this great idea for, this is how Half-Life 3 should be done. They're not going to take you seriously. They're not going to implement it. Okay. So that's just, my opinion, but that's not to say that's the end of that story, right? That's not and not to be, down about this, because really we're in this really nice, time. These past 5 years, 7 to 5 years have been amazing for independent game developers. So if you have a great game idea, you don't need a team of 500 people to develop that anymore. That was the case in the early 90s, mid 90s. You needed teams, at least 25 to more like 100, to develop for one of the big consoles. That's not the case anymore, right? So really quick, and I just, David Mullich he's done a lot of discussion on this, and he had a blog post a while back which has some really good insights in it. But his, people, he teaches as well, but he had said students, they always want to be the idea guy, the idea person for games. And there really is not a job like that. There's nothing in the field. You're never the idea guy. Now you could have ideas, and you could already be on a team where you have where you're producing and then come up with a new idea, and that might get implemented. But you're not, your sole reason to exist is not for new ideas. All right. So to kind of step back here for just a second, obviously, if you want to make a game, I'm assuming you have an idea, right? That's the next, your idea is going to be the next best game, and it very well could be, right? Without an idea, there's, why do you even want to make a game, right? I mean, so I'm sure everyone, if you want to make a game, you've got an idea, and I think I was going to just take a second and kind of open it up a little bit at this point. I've got some other slides, but is there any question on kind of direction, like as far as whether you have an idea and you want to implement it, or just where even to start? I didn't know if there was any general questions at all. You can ask me anything. I don't know. I'm used to random questions, so it's not a big deal one way or the other. Yeah. No, that's fine. Fine.
But I know I have interest in working on games, but I don't always have an idea for the game.
Sure.
I mean, I like to work on games.
Sure. No, yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's actually a really good thing, because it's only one idea usually, right? I mean, there's a lot of, I guess, sub ideas that get built around one main concept. But if everybody's trying to inject their own ideas, that also can derail a game, right? I mean, the point is to have a focused concept, a focused idea, and then implement that. And I had listed, I think, I had some thoughts, so the position of a game designer, people think that's the idea person, and really they're not. So a game designer, I think the clearest way to think about that is that's the person that develops the rules for a game, right? Now, a lot of that can be based around the story and setting of a game, but in general, if it's a tabletop game, right, or a board game, the game designer develops the rules, right, the rule book. Whether it's a platformer, they help design the rules as far as you jump on a character, you kill them, right, or you hit a block, you get a power-up. That's what the designer does, but they don't have that original idea, right? A lot of times they may or may be somebody else who has that original idea of, well, it's going to be a plumber that goes and tries to rescue the princess, right? Or it's, in any other game, right? So, but they have to implement, well, this is how you beat the level, right? So we break it up in stages. We have various worlds, and then depending on, you get to carry assets through the world. You can get power-ups that last small amounts of time or longer amounts of time. And those are all kind of the nitty-gritty details. So it's one of those things where, again, the idea guy, that thought of, I just want to have these big, grandiose ideas, and somehow they'll magically get implemented, right? The game designer doesn't do that. They have to actually go down and write, well, this is how all the exact specs for every single enemy. This is how many hits it takes to kill that enemy, or other. I guess I'm focusing on platformers here, right? But levels. This is the expected time to complete a level. All of those things the game designer implements, but they're very. It's very specific, right? This is a very rigorous job. It's not a I just throw random ideas out and they get implemented. So kind of to go back to your question, so you have kind of this overall idea, but a lot of it then in the design work is kind of fleshing out that overall idea and working on the specs, right? Specifications for everything. So if one person comes up with the idea, there can be 30 who are just implementing that idea. So I think yes. I mean, the question, I think it's a simple yes. You need people who just want to implement a game, a good idea that sounds like a solid concept. That's what you really want on a team. Does that help? Does that answer some? Okay. Any other? Yeah, sure.
This might be a little early.
That's fine.
What's your thoughts for the timing of the various formalities with creating the game? You're kind of talking originally about designing the game itself.
Right.
What about when you form an LLC? When
Right.
you get a written agreement between all the various parties to determine
Sure.
ownership, or when you do like a trademark search?
Right.
Whose name the game is not something.
Yep. So that's a really good question. So from my academic side, I typically say, we talk about ideas, and one of the things, I don't know, it can be discouraging at times, but there's kind of this classic saying in business and startups, right? To fail early and fail often, or fail often, fail early, however you want to say it. And that, with this I thought of ideas, I think the first thing to say is if you've got a really good idea, to focus on that, and that's good, but not to think that can be your only good idea in life. And the thought would be, if for some reason that idea gets implemented before you, which is a really good chance. I've heard people talk before that there's probably at least 3 other teams around the world implementing a very similar game as you at any time, at any point in time, which can be discouraging, right? It's like you're going to devote your life in making this game, and then somebody else is going to release it on Steam Early Access a month before you, right? And they're going to get all the press about it. It's not that they've even stolen your idea, right? At some point, there's kind of a, I don't know if I'd say a limited set of ideas, but a lot of times ideas overlap. And it's not that they've even stolen your idea, but it's possible that, again, your idea is kind of overlapping with someone else's. So keep that in mind first. So with all the trademark protection, copyright protection you can do, it's still possible someone can have the same idea or a similar one, or even a better idea, right? Or it gets implemented better. And at that point, your copyright protection is not as helpful, right? So, oh, okay. So you could tell me about that more, right? Right.
Games that have basically the same rules, as long as they don't reuse the same name, will reuse artwork
Yeah.
or other protected items.
Yeah.
You can't actually protect rules or concepts
Right.
by copying. So
Sure.
people recycle games all the time.
Right. And that's even, some studios are offended by that and others actually take it as a compliment, right? Game clones have been around since the beginning of games, right? Video games especially, for 40 years or more. And again, that's one of the things it's part of the industry. And it's not a bad thing to even, creating a clone is also not a bad thing, right? That's a reasonable, within law, right? Making sure you're not taking assets or using things that are protected. Again, a platformer by default feels like a clone a lot of times anyway, right? I mean, at some point, there's only so many new things that you can do with a platformer. Or a first-person shooter, or most other genres. So as far as how early, I'd almost say when you're ready. So forming LLC, that kind of depends on your team. If it's one of those things where if you're trying to do a lot of it solo, you can almost wait to do the final filing of your business paper and paperwork till very close to when you're wanting to start selling the game. If you're working with a bigger team, I think getting that out earlier is probably makes sense to make sure ownership is clear and how revenue will be distributed and those issues. So that's going to vary a lot depending on teams. And also the people. It's one of those things where if you're starting out, the first game you ever want to make and you're planning on it making $1 million and you're going to retire early, even though it's not enough money, right? If you're going to make 30 million, I don't know. The first thing you should probably consider is that you're not going to make money on your first game. But you're going to gain invaluable experience, right? And also a portfolio piece that later on you could talk to a Sony or a Microsoft and show them this game that you made, and they take you more seriously, even if it wasn't a top seller on any store. By having a game that they can go and you can send them a code for a free download and they can go and look at it, people take you more seriously if you've actually finished a product and released it. It's one of the things I see that a lot too. We have students that don't want to finish a game. And it's not that, it's one of those things, games are really, really hard. Finishing and publishing at the very end is the hardest part of making a game. Ideas are the easy part, right? Coming up with a great idea, that's a piece of cake. Finishing it and cleaning up all the small bugs on a platform, that's the part you never, ever want to do, right? That's the part people just stop, and they stop participating, and they just leave. Because it's hard, and it's tedious work, and but it's one of those things, if you finish that, if you get that done, people respect that, and they know that you're in it, you're passionate about games, and you will see it finished, and publishers respect that. Obviously, if you want a publisher to pay you to finish a game, they want to make sure you can actually do it. So they see that even if it's not even a great game, if it's a decent game, they still respect the fact that you finished, and that's huge weight, right? They consider that a really important aspect of things. Did you have multiple questions? I don't know if I answered all your question really or not. I would speak with an attorney, though. I mean, that's actually, a lot of things. You can find some really bad information on the web, so it never hurts to speak to an attorney, because it's one of those things. You just have to be careful, but also don't be too careful. If you're always taking really safe steps, you'll never finish, right? You have to take some risk. And worst case, you get a game and someone steals it from you and they release it under their own name, and that's kind of a worst case scenario. A lot of those, it's still a game you worked on, and you can still show what you contributed on the project. So even in that regard, even the worst case scenario, it's one of those things where it's still a productive, right? It's still productive time, and you can still show that you've done work and you have some skills in games. Okay. Any other questions? Is that, or yeah, go ahead.
So like starting out, you say like creating like a really kind of like fast game just to have one out is more important than like working years on like your first game?
I would say yes. I would say, let me think, for your first game, yeah, because there's a lot of things you don't know until you actually try it. And, if it's taking you, you could make an amazing game in 3 years, but there may be this one thing you didn't realize that was a constraint with releasing it on an Apple platform or something like that, right? That could mess you up, and it messes up your release for another 6 months. So you've already spent 3 years of your life, and then you have another 6-month wait because of some legal issue or something else that if you'd already gone through the process once, you get really used to, or at least more experience with the problems that come up. And not to say, I'm not recommending you release clones and clones of just, Flappy Bird, right? I mean, while you can do that once maybe, just, again, a Flappy Bird clone is not the worst thing in the world. It's probably not going to be a highlight of your portfolio, but it is a game, and it is, if you complete one and release it, that may be one you don't want to sell, right? You can give it away for free. But you learn a lot. I mean, you constantly learn, and the industry changes. Every 6 months there's huge changes, even in just implementation. If you're making a game in Unity or Unreal, that changes. Well, Unity changes every year, but so does Unreal and other platforms. And then you have the store agreements, depending on, now we got the Nintendo Switch, right? They're opening up development. It's going to be a lot more open than Nintendo's ever done before, which is great. That's great for all of us, anybody who wants to make games. But I'm not sure yet what their agreements are going to be like. There's a few things, and they're still Nintendo, so they're going to be pretty, rigid about things. But if you have a game you've already released and it has downloads on some app store, or it was a decent on another platform, you can take that and say, hey, Nintendo, I'd really like to either make a sequel to this or a version of this. And again, they'll talk to you, right? As opposed to, I've got this awesome idea for the Switch, but here's my design doc and a couple images. And they really, you won't even get the door open at that point. So yeah, I think the answer would be, make them good, right? Still make it a good game, but it's okay to make them really short concept ideas. Does that answer your question? Okay. Let's see if I can bring it up here. It's escaping me at this second. The Stanley Parable developers released it was a short experience game. Do you remember it? It was a really long title. Is that, I don't remember what it's called. Well, anyway, so they released on Steam for free. It was just a really fun, simple, short game, and it was one of those things where it was neat, and it just brought more attention to their studio, and it's okay to do that, right? There's nothing to release a game and well, I'm not gonna be able to find it, but anyway. This game did well. Obviously, good ratings on Steam, which is hard to come by now, right? At times. But anyway, Yeah, think of shorter experiences. I think that's a really safe way to go at this point in the industry. People are wanting, again, if you promise, right, No Man's Sky, and people, right, he said, Sean Murray has had issues with promising too much, right? And it's hard for a small team to make a huge game. But anyway, if you promise a little and you deliver more, that's also a really safe way to go, right? A fun, short experience. Yeah, just really quick. Go ahead. I just had a couple other job descriptions, and I'll just go through it. But yeah.
So I grew up in the early 90s.
Yeah. Sure.
They didn't have any opportunities like you guys today. I have an 18-year-old that actually goes to EKU.
Okay.
Loves video games. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about EKU's program maybe in this kind of space. If someone's interested in it, and loves video games but doesn't really have a whole lot of skills from a programming standpoint, you talk maybe a little bit about the program. If someone like that is interested, where would we start?
Okay. So just interested in making games but not being a programmer. Is that kind of and that's the thing. Programming is an important part of developing games, but it's not the only part. I mean, there's programmers by themselves cannot make with a few exceptions, right? Tetris, I guess you could throw out there, right? With a few exceptions, they're not going to make a good game by themselves, right? There's the industry discussion of programmer art, right? I mean, it's never looks good usually, and and that's a huge part. Art, whether it's animation or modeling or 2D art assets, are extremely important. If they're not good in your game, people don't want your game, or they're not going to play it, or it's just going to be a mess to try and play. So those are things to look at, and we've had students. Let me drop back out here just a second. Well, no, I closed Chrome. Sorry. So one thing to think about, if they need to contribute something, right? So to think about what can you contribute to a game. Writing is extremely important in a lot of games. So no technical skill at all, but creative writing, if you're a good writer, you can be a huge contributor to a team. Sound, music composition, sound design, huge parts of games. And again, no programming skill at all. You're not supposed to be a programmer. That's one of those things. I don't want necessarily all the artists to be programmers because it broadens your skill too much, right? I want artists to be really good at art, and with their specific tools, which are, if it's ZBrush or Photoshop or other editors or like Maya or Blender, get really good at those, and because it's really hard to get good at all of them, right? It's hard to be a really good 3D modeler and a really good programmer. It's just difficult. So to kind of find the thing they're passionate about, is it art? Is it sound? Is it story? Lore of a game? And all those are good, and that can all be contributing, can really contribute. And the nice thing too, we've seen this in the industry, asset stores, whether it's the Unity asset store, which I think I can bring up. So the cool thing is, you used to have a programmer you knew that to develop stuff to make the game, right? Well, now you can come up with your own assets, whether it's the Unity asset store, there's the Unreal Engine asset store, there's places like TurboSquid, and there's other ways to sell art or sell sound. You can sell your background tracks, right, for music. And to be clear, people have full-time jobs just selling stuff on these stores, right? This is a lucrative business. Because there are programmers who don't know any artists, so what they do is they go and buy all these asset packs, and they have pre-done art, and they try and throw them in their game. not the best way to do it, but a lot of times you do have an artist on your team, but you can't ask your artist to do everything. They have to live. So you do buy additional assets to kind of fill the gaps. So it's been great, right? This has been really good for artists, for any kind of content creator at all. And these prices vary, $20, right? $20. I think this is probably a team who made this. I don't know if this was a single person. But $20 and you start selling a couple thousand of these, which happens, right? It starts adding up. And then you have other asset packs and you all start selling thousands of them. Because there are a lot of active users on this and they spend money. And you instantly have a global audience. There's people all over the world buying this. And this works whether you speak English, whether you speak, German or Korean, any language, the asset pack still works just fine, right? Okay. So, yeah, finding what you're passionate about, and then I think that's probably the most important thing, right? It's one thing to be passionate about games, and that's great. I think we all are, right? We're here. But then to find out what can you specifically contribute, and a lot of times that's not easy to come up with, but you have to start trying, right? That's the thing. And a lot of times, again, if outside the programming side, a lot of games have really cool modding scenes, right? Where you can mod and put your own assets directly in an existing game. And that's something that works really well, pretty easy to access. So does that answer the first part of your question some?
Yeah.
And then specifically about EKU, I can talk about, but yeah. Okay, sure.
When you're 18 years old, maybe let's just say, you're young and you don't really know what you want to do.
Right.
But you have this stuff, and it's not going to come natural to you immediately. There are special cases where you might be a big-time artist when you're 16 years old.
Right.
A lot of times that doesn't happen.
Yeah, sure.
So if you could talk more about the program at EKU
Yep.
that helps to kind of get to that. I mean, I know you have to have a passion,
Right.
if you're interested in it, you can explain maybe a little bit about what things that, what the program is about.
Sure. So we have we have the bachelor's in computer science. We are starting. We're probably next fall. We will have a minor in game content design, which will be a minor. Any major can take that. That'll be 2D art and animation, 3D digital. Let me see if I say it right. 3D sculpting or digital sculpting. So ZBrush. 3D printing, and then screenwriting. So no programming, right? So that's a minor that's available. And then the other thing we do that we really we think is great, are game jams. So that's the 48-hour weekend where you meet with other like-minded individuals and you just try and make a game in 48 hours. And that's one of those things, maybe just go and observe. Because kind of the first time, it's really hard to get involved and contribute. Because 48 hours is one of those things where it's like the teams that are there are trying to work as hard as they can, as fast as they can. And they'll try and help people. Like games, the industry is great. For the most part, everyone really wants to help everybody else. For the most part, right? Especially around here, it's not as cutthroat. But, contribute, and it's 48 hours, so if you know that you're really good at sprite sheets and doing 2D animation, you can offer that up to a team and say, hey, I can do this for you. But kind of the first time, even just observing and not expecting to be really producing a game for the first time you run through. But then the next time you got an idea, right? And you can say, well, I want to practice this before the next before the next game jam. And at that point, I'm going to really focus on 2D art, or I'm really going to focus on sound and practice that some. Try it, spend a couple weeks, and then the next game jam, go in and say, hey, is there a team that needs sound, a sound composer, sound design, And then you can even show some, this is what I did last time and it worked really well. I tried this one thing. So we do those 3 times a year. For those outside of EKU, right, LexPlay, Run Jump Dev runs those in Lexington multiple times a year, right? They do Global Game Jam and some of the Ludum Dare game jams. Game Dev Lou does those as well. And there are some others that kind of pop up from time to time. But those are really good because I talked about earlier, finishing a game and actually getting one done. If you only have 48 hours, it's probably not going to be an amazing game, but you can probably get it finished, right? At least where there's kind of a win condition at the end or it finishes. And people, respect the fact that 48 hours is pretty crazy. If you get a decent game in 48 hours, that's great, right? You're done at that point. And, that's, I don't know, I would push toward that. We do those at EKU 3 times a year. All students are welcome. And we usually have a talk beforehand too, which is interesting. So that's probably the easiest way to get in because it's anybody, just come on and you can at least watch or talk and see what's going on. But it's pretty open. I mean, there's not, people will work with others. So, I think that does that answer your question pretty well? Okay. Any other questions about anything else so far? I got 15 minutes, I guess. Okay. But the asset stores have been great. I had a student, he's a programmer, but he's starting to do a little more modeling on the side, sculpting. And he put 2 models on Turbo Squid, and he sold, I think, $300 in a month, which he wasn't expecting any money off of it at all, right? It was just, I'll try it. I'll see what happens. And free money, literally, he was not expecting it. He had to do the work for course assignments. Cool thing about EKU, we do give you all your intellectual property. We don't retain any of it, so you can sell anything you make in class, which is nice, right, from an IP side of things. So that's been great for the industry. It's good on both sides. As a programmer, if you don't know artists, you can go and buy your art and be done. It's usually better to have an artist on your team. I would highly recommend that. But it's good to play around with stuff, and you can just try things out. And there are free assets available too. So that's been good for artists because they can now sell, right? They can sell things without having to put them straight in a game. And it's good for programmers because they can use these existing assets, right? And let me think. I had a couple more slides. Okay, what that is. I can just go through these. I won't, let's see. Yeah, we got a couple minutes still. If you have any questions, though, feel free to ask. It's no problem. So a level designer, again, this is, depending on the game, this is extremely important, right? If you're working on CSGO, right, you research levels, you research the heat map of, right, whether there's a bottleneck in a map, specific areas you want to have, 3 paths to go through every end of the map. There's really important aspects of that. The cool thing is games like Mario Maker, right? You get to be the level designer, and that's a really fun aspect of things. And again, this really depends on the game. Usually, you're not going to have a level designer specific position unless you're talking about a large team, right? This can be over 50, well, maybe 30, depending on the game, of course. But usually a larger team before you have a specific level designer. Writers, again, this is going to be more specific to maybe an RPG, right, or other games where there's you have specific dialogue, whether it could even be a interactive fiction game, right? Game writer in that case, extremely important. Some games do not have writers at all, right? And sometimes it shows, and sometimes it's okay to not have a writer. But if you're interested in writing, there are positions for that. Programmers, again, get a little bit too much weight as far as tools have become so available now. Programming is still extremely important, not like it was 10 years or even, or farther back. Whether you're using Unreal or Unity or Game Maker or other tools, programming is still important. It's important to understand the logic that you need, right? Most games need the same logic, and that's an overlapping skill set with a programmer. But again, programming, a large team, Electronic Arts usually doesn't use these other engines, right? They use their own. So they have a whole programming team just to develop tools like a level editor, right? So some small teams don't have their own level editors. They do it all themselves. And then larger teams, larger studios develop their own level editors so that, jump back, the level designer doesn't have to see code, right? Which is a nice thing for a level designer. If the programmer is doing the level design as well, they implement that directly in the engine. But a lot of times that shows if they're not a good level designer, right? And let me see what else. Game artists, again, really important. And whether it's a 2D game, 2.5D, 3D game, that's going to change what artists you need. You typically always want concept art. And again, larger teams are going to have someone who's just a game concept artist, right? So that's an individual position, and that's all they do, right? Or storyboards. Important part, especially if you're trying to communicate across a really large team of designers, programmers, artists. You need good, consistent concept art and storyboards. And let's see there. Kind of jump through here a little bit. Sound designers, again, really important aspect. You can go buy sounds from these libraries online, but you can usually tell if it's just stuff that's been purchased and thrown in. It needs a good, consistent style and someone who knows what they're doing to give a game consistency and to have a good atmospheric sound. Testers, again, a really important aspect of games to make sure they don't have bugs, right? And that, again, that's kind of that job that you see or you hear about when you're really young. You're like, oh, I want to play a game my entire life. I want to get paid to play games. The current name is typically now like a quality assurance person, right? Personnel. And it's a tedious job. It's one of those things, you play games for a living, but you also have to document every single bug you find and write tons of specs out, huge amount of writing in that job. But they're really important jobs, right? Because as a programmer, especially on a larger team, you may never even get to play the game until it's farther along, right? You're just writing specific little pieces of code or implementing small things. So the tester, though, needs to see how it all works together and make sure it all works. And then the last one then for kind of larger teams as well. And again, this stuff scales really well because if you have a team of 2, you still need a project manager. It's just you're only managing yourself and one other person, right? This has a lot of overlap with Hollywood, so they call it producers a lot of times too. But they're working on meetings, making sure everyone's on budget and on time. And again, smaller studios, people wear multiple hats. Bigger studios, you have a team of producers. You have 20 producers working with different levels of hierarchy. So that's kind of a quick overlap, or no, kind of an overview. And there's a lot, depending on the specific genre, this changes a lot, right? That this, certain games, you have a lot more artists than programmers, right? And that's fine. That works well. Other games, you may have a lot of programmers and a few amount of artists and only one sound designer and so on. Sound is still one of those things where a lot of it's still done freelance, You know, it's hard to have a full-time sound person for an indie studio unless you're doing specific, really important sound work in your games. So people do freelance work a lot of times. A lot of this is still freelance for independent games. Testers as well as freelanced or friends. People use friends and family a lot on this, which does not guarantee quality, but you know, you kind of run out of money at some point. But all right, I think that's my last. Yeah, that's my last slide. Any other questions? Does that bring up anything else you're curious about? Anything else I can answer? So I mean, that's going back to the kind of the first slide there. Making a game, what I recommend is just to go start and try. The worst case, you throw up your hands and you kind of give up for a while, and that's okay. I would recommend trying to find others who are interested in making games, even if it's not with you. If they're making their own game and you're making a game, find times and work together. It really helps to have a network. Really important to have, a little bit of camaraderie and just kind of some social push to meet and have, if you have questions, they might be able to answer them, or you can at least go together and or you don't feel bad if you're stumped and somebody else is stumped on the same thing, right? It always helps to feel like you're not failing and you're the only person in the world who can't figure this stuff out. But yeah, find groups who are making games too. Run Jump Dev here in Lexington is a good group. Game Dev Lou or different schools will also. Kentucky State has a program. Moorhead has, I think, a program, and then we have a program at EKU, and there's students around who are trying to make games. So whether or not they're students, we have a lot of. It's okay if you're not a student. That's fine. But any other questions? Anything else? I can probably. Oh yeah, I only got 6 minutes. So. Okay. I can probably stop there. I'll give the next team a minute to get on in here. But all right, I appreciate you stopping in.